Hi, I'm Scott Simpson,
And I'm Charla Stever.
and we're going to be talking to you about a project that we're really, I think, pretty excited about, the Responsive Practices for All Students Learning Pathway that we're doing with a couple of different cohorts of educators in North Dakota.
But before we get into that, let's hear a little bit from Lucy Fredericks.
Well, hello everyone. I'm Lucy Fredericks. I'm the Director in the Office of Indian Multicultural for the Department of Public Instruction, and want to thank you all for attending our session. And so we are going to be talking about a little bit about our North Dakota Native American Essential Understandings Project, which we started back in the spring of 2015, where we brought elders together from the 4 tribal nations in North Dakota. And they were the ones who developed the essential understandings of what they would like students to know in the classrooms about the Native Americans living here in North Dakota. And from that, we have started a project recently called the Responsive Practices for All Learners, and it aligns with the North Dakota Native American Essential Understandings. We have done it in a few districts and schools in North Dakota, and it has been very successful. It's a project that all teachers, administrators, basically all educators within a school can participate. And it's culturally responsive practices, and it includes several areas that will help teachers in the state become more familiar with the essential understandings, and also culturally responsive practices that can be used in the classrooms. It is a successful project, and we have cohorts that are participating in the project and in the program. And with that, I'm going to turn it over now to Scott and Charlotte to begin telling you about the program. Thank you.
Terrific. So we're going to begin actually by hearing a little bit from the teachers themselves who were participants in the very first cohort. And so we'll take just about 20 minutes or so, and we'll hear from them about some of the high points of their experience in being part of that. We'll come back and talk about some of the details after we finish listening to them.
Having survived the COVID-19 pandemic and being confronted with unfinished learning, learning loss, and the need to refocus the purpose of our schools and reach deeply into student identity and really personhood building, and trying to put back some of that security that was lost because of the pandemic, we knew we had to do this school year differently. We had to reach the child, rebuild the relationship, make sure that Maslow's hierarchy of 3 basic needs was met to the best ability that we could as a school system, and then focus on the learning. Very quickly, I went to the culture and language teachers and aspect and just thought, here's our chance to grow this. And this is a perfect opportunity to support them with very meaningful professional development. We can't even begin to scratch the surface of meaningful culture and language instruction and development in the school if we don't have this foundation of conversation and relationship with the people who are going to be doing that work. We need to actually know who you are, what do you think, what do you support, and how does this very important topic of historical trauma and recovery from that help us do our culture and language job better, and trying to understand the importance of relationship and trust and understanding history and experience before trying to push into a very delicate space that is and should be protected and maintained without being disrespectful, without being overly zealous or demanding when people and environment we're not quite ready yet. And I think that's what the beauty of the pathway did for us. It helped us create that environment where people are now ready to engage in the difficult work of determining what needs to be taught, what needs to be focused on, who's going to do it, what resources do we have.
The get-togethers, the face-to-face learning, the small groups, the book was very good. It just opens your mind to other people's thinkings and how they interpret stuff.
The IDI assessment, I think it truly gave me a picture of who I am and why I do the things I do. When I first got the results, I was kind of like defensive about them, like it kind of shocked me. But when I got into realization and really looked at myself, it was the true image of me. It made a huge difference in just looking at myself and who I am as a person and accepting it. It allowed me to accept it. It took me a little bit, but when I was truthful with myself, I was able to accept who I am, how to become a better communicator with other people.
Learning about trauma and how it's a bodily response and how it relates on a personal level to my family, because there's some trauma care going on with my family right now. And in addition to that, just how I've seen our students impacted, how their responses are classic with what we read in the book for trauma, and how important it is that we know as educators that our students are going through these things. Truly, they can't help the responses that they're giving until we help them to go through them.
I think more or less the small group discussions, but even as we got into our class discussions, those were critical for me. The small group discussions, the group that I was in, there were two that really opened up, and shared some really personal things. And it got me to think, wow, if they can share those type of experiences with me, with the group, then maybe I should open up a little bit too.
I'm a gatherer of information, and I like being surrounded by everybody's point of view, different points of view, because I think if I'm going to be a better person, I do better if I know what other people are thinking or feeling.
As you look at, your students and just seeing them as human beings and not just working towards human doings in the classroom, it's going to help you to feel more connected to your students, to their parents. But if you connect with other educators and connect with that book, with that the sharing circle, that's been useful. So a better connection with the students is what I feel is you get out of this.
I could start the Shindamang Awe Masanayagan by talking about this book. Ishinikade Nukumis Oninjin. It's called My Grandma's Hand. It really helped me a lot, benefited from this. Now, it helped me to look at the Americans different, because I've learned Gewino Asago Ge Te Gakwadi Getuat, because I learned that they have trauma also. He talked about what happened to the non-indigenous, the Europeans, over there in Europe. Yeah, before they came over here to Turtle Island, Ishinikadamang, North America, what we call North America now. It's been difficult to have good relations, Anishinaabe, Sagu, indigenous and non-indigenous. Misago o Kikendaso, and so this knowledge, Inki Wichi Egu, it helped me. Nawaj Chinisatotawagwa in the Dikit, I'll say, to understand more of them,
The first part was standing back and taking the IDI test. And at first you're like, oh, I got this, and I I know, I really know I'm this open person, but at the same time, looking at the results, it really teaches you to have the B'dayin Dizawin, humility. That part really kind of made me stand back and really take a good look at myself as a person, as an educator, a mother, a grandmother, and how am I going to use that to teach my own children, my students, our future, and getting the multiple perspectives of other people, and then using that to kind of adjust mine. Relating to the circle of trust, listening with every fiber and being present. That was another component that was important. And then the readings, being able to relate to other cultures, other backgrounds that have struggled throughout history as well.
I never really looked at it and valued the importance of a circle of trust until we went through the pandemic. You need somebody. You need a circle of trust. And not only just developing one, but making sure you have people in there like this, that you can trust, that could keep things confidential, that aren't going to judge you and things like that. But to let those emotions out instead of keep letting them build up. I think it's valuable in life, even let's say the pandemic never happened. It's still a valuable part of life. You should still have that circle of trust.
And we could create a cohort of folks who are now thinking and dreaming and believing in a similar fashion. Like, this is actually possible. And we can continue to do more. This is just the springboard to something greater in the future. Getting those people in a place where they can discuss and debate and dialogue and disagree and continue to learn all along that way. In so many of our school improvement documents, we've made reference to social emotional learning, or we've made reference to positive behavior interventions and supports. We've talked about and are starting a multi-tiered system of support. And we've often included culture and language as a part of that work, but then didn't dedicate time, resources, or influence to it. This Pathways changed all of that, because now my culture and language teachers are in the room with their principal all day for 5 sessions. It's never happened before.
There's so much I've learned from it that, I'm excited for my staff to be a part of it.
If our adults, our educators, aren't dealing with their traumas, then they can't help some of the things they do,
We have to make sure our students know who they are, where they're coming from. And a lot of times in our community, people say that's a family issue. And I agree with that. I'm not going to disagree with that point. But I think our role as educators too, because I've actually heard this. I've heard this from an employee in my system that, when she went away to college and she brought, her children with her to go to college, and her son came home from school and said, Mom, did you know I'm Indian, or did you know I'm Native? Our children coming from all different parts of our community, but do they know that they're a Native person? Do they know what that means? So how do I impress that upon our staff to get that knowledge base out there even more so than I already have? So.
There's been, just so much that has been put upon our people, but yet how we can rise from that, and knowing that, we have a place at the table just as well as anybody else does. So that I think the students have seen, as far as talking with them, I think that they have seen that that there's a place for them, at any place that they want to go. And I think they've enjoyed the sharing circles, and they're a little shy, but also at the same time they're glad to be able to speak their thoughts, you know, and sharing themselves and just feeling connected more to myself and to each other. So, and to the school as well, you know, knowing that what they're going to say, what they're going to do is, you know, is going to be appreciated.
So I'm learning and not to be judging, you know. I am learning that. So, no, Asia do taman iwe, as I do that, no wajke Asia manachi atu anishin ishnabe manachi agwa. I find I can be gentler or have more respect for my fellow human being. That's what I've been learning in here, you know. As we were taught not to fix each other. Yeah, you know, Geiko iwe. And apene is it chige yankupan? Is it chige yankupan? I used to, is it chige yamban? I used to do that all the time. Geabigo aningo, and still today sometimes. But now I've learned it's not good.
Really, the pathway has taught me to be more mindful, more respectful for the different beliefs and perspectives that are out there. We tend to assume that because we're from the same community or same religious group or traditional or whatever it may be, that we all think alike. And we don't. We all come from different backgrounds. Even if we're from the same, there's still some difference there. And so just being able to appreciate where they're coming from and allowing them to be themselves and to have trust that I am going to be open-minded and I am going to listen to them. If I'm modeling it, they can start picking it up and maybe they'll be doing the same down the road when they're interacting with their peers or other teachers, just to see a different point of view.
Oh, you know, I think about the circle of trust, the listening, you know, listening at those deep levels, you know, and building that community of trust, how important that is, and working with school improvement teams. I mean, when you're starting to look at data and you're starting to look at, you know, how are our schools doing, it can get very personal. And, you know, so we have to have that level of trust where we say, we're not focusing on how you're teaching, we're focusing on, you know, each kid by kid and skill by skill. If we focus on that student and what they're doing and not on us, then we're going to get better. You know, having those tough conversations with school improvement teams, it's very hard. But if we don't know our why we are here and what our purpose is, then we have to keep that focus. Because if we're going to go in there and we're going to ask teachers to do all of this and to give all of this, you know, they really have to know their why. It's about change so that we make things better for our students. That has to be our why.
And I'm hoping that it helps our culture and language teachers and even our principals see the power they have and hold to create. And I know that teams cannot be effective if there is no trust. Sometimes the work we have to do is not fun. Sometimes it's not entertaining. Sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes it brings up things that we'd rather not discuss or re-experience. But this Team of Champions work helped build those kind of connections. We can get so caught up in our work responsibilities that we forget the person who's behind the office, the person who's inside the classroom. And it's important in our work to remember that our principals and our teachers are also people.
Get ready to have your mind blown because you think that, you know, like I said, you think that you know everything, you know yourself, and honestly, we really don't until it's put in front of us and we're tested. There's room to learn and to grow, and as an educator, it's a lifetime, and it's not only improving ourselves for ourselves, but for our students as well.
And I saw basically, grandmother's hands, and just automatically thought, okay, it's going to be about Native grandmother working with her grandkids and whatever, and I start reading the story, and it's like, okay, I was way off on that, where the name actually comes from, and the grandmother working in the cotton fields, and those things. But it also made me realize, okay, even though we're so different, or we see ourselves as so different from all these other races and other cultures and people from different areas, thinking about the name of the book's like, okay, we're not all that different.
Well, we understand better, I hope now, some of the historical traumas or the other influences in their life, and how they view the world through that lens.
I would do it all over again in a heartbeat. And I've been really, really busy, but I would honest, I've got no regrets, and I'd highly recommend it, and I would do it again in a heartbeat.
I know a lot of other schools are looking for this also. They're, with that SB 2304 that's out there, they're looking, they're searching, they want to know, if what they're doing is, right or not. We're all looking, we're all searching, and I think that it's so important to do things, other than what you've been doing, because the students deserve it.
This is going to change the world. Oh, Kendaso, and this knowledge. I knew Kichigego. This was big thing, important. And Inki Kishikan, I couldn't wait to get to that. And keep practice. Ani wikwache tuyan geko pimatisian all the rest of my life to practice. Kapike Kendaso yanema, what I learned in here. So so I thank you so much.
I'm going to say it's awesome. Charla and Scott, yourself and Scott, have been very supportive and constructive in a good way from the beginning of this journey and to the end. If there was something that wasn't explained, you took the time to explain it in a mindful and respectful way to where we could relate and understand where you were coming from, but also to help us be great humans, but professional as well towards our peers and towards our students. So having that in mind, building a community, among our students, among our peers, among our own community, and networking out to other people, and kind of breaking down the barriers so that we're able to relate and maybe start to heal and learn more and not be so judgmental, because everybody has their struggles. It just looks a little bit different.
If I had one final thought to share about the Team of Champions pathway, it would be that we need more time to do this. 5 sessions is not enough. 6 sessions, 8 sessions. I know I have one principal who's thinking about an all year long experience, which I think would be great. The work that we do in Indian country is not easy in regards to education. And it takes a special group of people who are willing to stand up, accept responsibility for that call of duty, and then begin to do something about it. We are definitely more confident in our abilities to even encounter that challenge. We definitely move forward out of the Team of Champions pathways, understanding that we have the ability, and because we've gone through this process of learning about each other and understanding what makes each other tick and what also challenges us, I think it puts us in a better position for everything else that schools need. You send your kids, we've got it. We have the skills, we've got the tools, we have the practices, we have the strategies, but more importantly, we have the people. that are willing, ready, and able to meet the students that show up. I would much rather do that work with the people that I have been through Team of Champions with than try and do it alone.
I just want to say it's just been an awesome experience, and it will change your thinking and probably your life, professionally and personally, and the sky's the limit with it. So, Team McGuage.
Well, that was terrific. It was such a good experience working with them, and such a wonderful group of educators.
And being able to now work with a group from that group.
Right.
We had one of the administrators who asked if we could do this with his entire staff, and so currently we're working with a group from Turtle Mountain at one of the schools. It's been wonderful.
Been terrific. So we'd like to go into a few of the details about the project. You may have some questions, and of course we're going to give you our contact information, so any questions that you have about it or about possibly doing something like this where you're at, we'd be happy to answer those questions, as would Lucy. We're going to give you some context, though, just so you understand where our work is coming from. And this is really the culmination of about 10 years of work that we've been doing like this in South Dakota and North Dakota. We began about 10 years ago when Indigenous elders across South Dakota had finished the Oceti-Sakowin Essential Understandings, and they invited us to work with them, not as culture experts, but rather as learning specialists who could help teachers in schools, whether they're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, to know how to implement the essential understandings that the elders had written into their curriculum.
So that started back in around 2012, and in 2015 we began working with Lucy Fredericks, and the first step that we did during that time was to help facilitate a group of elders to write the North Dakota Native American Essential Understandings for North Dakota, which was a great process, something that we were really honored to be part of, and just so many good things came out of those discussions that we had with the elders, and then ultimately the document, the Essential Understandings document, was created. And so from there have been a variety of phases of the work, both trying to get the word out about the Essential Understandings, helping educators learn how do we use these in the classroom, and then creating some lessons to align the essential understandings with content standards in the state. And so that happened over the next few years, up until really now, where we have another phase of the work that's happening, which is how do we really prepare ourselves to be in a good place to do this important work.
Right. A big central piece are two big central pieces are those essential understandings, and then video interviews that we did with elders in both states. Those are kind of the content, the what, and this pathway is really about the how. How do I take those and make them a part of what I do in my classroom in a really good way? How do I prepare myself? How I prepare my environment to meet the needs of all of my students, whether they're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, no matter where they're coming from or what their background is. And so that's really the context for this work. Some of the discoveries that we made that helped to shape this outcome, this pathway, one is we go with the stones that roll. So much energy is spent trying to get the people who are resistant, to get to really attack that directly and say this needs to happen and you're resistant, but we're going to push this. What we found was that we can waste a lot of time and energy and even money doing that. Whereas if we begin with those who are ready to champion this work, if we begin there, then what happens is they get excited. Their excitement becomes contagious and it spreads.
One of the things that we've discovered in this work too is that it's really important that some personal reflection happen first, and that's something that we've built into this learning pathway. It's an opportunity for educators to take a look at themselves and say, you know, what has my life experience been? Why do I think the way I do about certain things? Why do I struggle with this? Or why do I really enjoy this? And so one of the things that we started using that we find to be a very helpful tool is the IDI, the Intercultural Development Inventory. And that's something that is one of the first steps we use within the pathway for that very reason, to give educators an opportunity to sit down and think about, you know, what do I do when I encounter somebody who's different from me? What are the tools that I have? How do I work with them? How do I make good relationships there? And so the IDI became definitely an important piece of this pathway.
And in the participant videos, you heard many of them talk about how powerful that was. It was one of the most powerful pieces of the pathway. Another important piece of this is the Circle of Trust. Charlotte and I are both facilitators for the Center for Courage and Renewal, which was started by Parker Palmer, if you're familiar with any of his work, Courage to Teach, and Inner Wholeness, Hidden Wholeness, excuse me. And that process for how we come together in respectful ways to talk about sometimes challenging things is a process that all the participants learn and that we use throughout the entire pathway.
And then one other area is culturally responsive practices. That is something that we try to focus on for at least a portion of the pathway, where our educators are learning about what does it mean to create that kind of a learning environment for my students. How do I make sure that I am creating a space where every child, every student feels welcome to show up as they are? And how do I make that space really a rich learning environment where students can settle in, they feel safe, they feel empowered to speak and to bring up things in the classroom, even if it's not what everyone else thinks, that they have the ability to do some of that. So those are some of the areas that we felt were most important, and the discoveries that we've made in our work that we felt like were really important to include in this pathway program.
So you've heard from the teachers, from the participants themselves, the bits and pieces that were really strong and stood out for them. We're going to take a look holistically, looking at this graphic here about the team of champions and all the pieces. You heard about the IDI, of course, the Intercultural Development Inventory. That's a big piece at the beginning and at the end. We heard about the being culturally responsive. It's kind of a mini course Charlotte was talking about, where they watch some videos and they have small group discussions, and they get to practice. How do we have these respectful conversations? My Grandmother's Hands, you heard about that in the video. It's a powerful book that gives a lot of practical ways of dealing with trauma, our own trauma, our students' trauma, even trauma with our colleagues, trauma that we may experience in dealing with parents and grandparents. Very, very powerful book. There are 5 face-to-face seminars where we gather together to process a lot of this information and have those bigger conversations and make sure everyone's taking away what the important pieces that they're going to need to use in their classrooms. And finally, there's the implementation and coaching, where each participant develops an idea to use with their students in their setting. One of the big ideas from the pathway, and then they have the opportunity to have us visit their classroom or view a video of their teaching and do a little bit of coaching.
And it's really been the combination of these key pieces that has made this pathway such a powerful experience for educators. I know for us, we continue to learn as we go through it with new teachers and educators. We learn about the different things that will be very helpful for educators in their classroom environments. Moving into the IDI, we want to give kind of a high-level overview of what the IDI is all about. It is something that's been around for about 3 decades. It is something that's been evaluated, and several dissertations, I think, have been written about this. It is something that large corporations and small corporations use all around the world. It's in a lot of different languages. So it's kind of a long-standing, time-tested tool that we can use. And so it's an assessment. It takes about 20 minutes for the individual to take, and they go through a series of questions and answer, in this particular scenario, what would you do, or how do you feel about this? And then as they complete that assessment, they get a score that places them on this continuum, the intercultural development continuum. And so we'll just take a moment to kind of pop through the different levels that they might show up in on this continuum, and we'll start that now, beginning with the monocultural side. Do you want to talk about the...
Yeah, we'll start there. In the monocultural mindset, monocultural simply means I'm looking at everything from my own little bubble of perspective, which is where we all begin. But if my experiences in life have been really relegated to only people very much like myself, to that degree, I'm really not going to have a basis for understanding difference at much of a deep level. If someone asked me, what do you know about people from Mexico, I might be able to say, yeah, I think they eat burritos and tacos, but it doesn't go much deeper than that. The challenge for an adult who is still in a monocultural mindset, when they engage and interact with someone very different from themselves, they really just don't have the experience or the knowledge to even recognize the differences that exist and how and the implications of those differences. And so therefore it's very easy to do things that are problematic, and the problem occurs and you don't even know. I don't even know what happened. What did I say? I'm not sure what's going on.
From there, we can move into a place called polarization, and that is where we get to a place where we're noticing those differences, but as we notice difference, we're also creating some judgment about those differences. So if I notice that you say something differently from me, or you do something differently from me, I may make an assessment about that, an evaluation where I say, that's not how I do it. That must be wrong. Or, if they just knew how I saw that, then they would understand. And it sort of goes from that, very self-centered perspective of I see the world a certain way. I notice that there are some differences out there, but they maybe make me a little uncomfortable, and I may create judgment about them. In polarization, we can be in 2 different sides to that. One is reversal, which is where I see maybe the person who's different, or the group that's different from me, in a more positive light than I see my own cultural group that I'm a part of. We can also be in a place of defense, where I see the people, the group that I am part of, in a more positive light than others. And so in that place of polarization, there's a lot going on there. And it's really where we're developing our understanding of the differences, becoming aware of them. And I want to make sure we say here too that these differences that we're talking about can be a variety of things. They aren't all about race and culture, or ethnic backgrounds. They're also about things like gender and LGBTQ identity and socioeconomic status.
Politics, religion, all kinds of differences.
So as we explore differences, think of it in the broadest sense of culture, all of the different things that make us unique.
Right. So all of that we've talked about so far falls under monocultural. We're moving into the kind of no man's land in between monocultural and intercultural, and that's minimization. And minimization is where most of our population spends most of its time. And whereas polarization saw difference and made judgments about it, minimization says, hey, let's just ignore difference. Let's just focus on the things that we agree on. And that is a move in the right direction. But it creates a number of problems, particularly for those who are not in the dominant position. The thing to remember about minimization is that in any given situation, there is usually a dominant and a non-dominant position. The example I like to give would fall along the lines of gender. If I worked in an office that had for decades been all men, just a male-centric office, and suddenly one day we hire a woman, okay? If I'm a male in that office in minimization, I'm in a dominant position. And what my minimization might look like is this. I'd come in, I'd say, hey guys, let's tone down some of the guy talk. Let's, we're gonna have a lady coming in here this week, and we wanna make her feel okay, so let's just kind of try to be on your best behavior. Kind of try to, tone down some of those guy things, and that would be minimization from a dominant position. But when you think about minimization from a non-dominant position, you think about this woman who wakes up in the morning, she's gotten this job, she really needs it badly, okay? But she is, from the very moment she wakes up, she's thinking about what she's gonna wear, what she's not gonna wear, what she's gonna say, what she's not gonna say, because she's gonna need to leave huge chunks of who she is, things that she might normally talk about, topics that she might usually bring up. She's gonna be trying to just be one of the guys. And so what happens in that situation, from that non-dominant position, all of the bending and all of the giving and all of the silencing happens on that non-dominant side of things, whether it's an issue of gender, an issue of race, an issue of ethnic heritage, whatever it is. The person who loses a big chunk of who they are is the person in that non-dominant position. If we're blind to that in minimization, then those in the dominant position think, hey, we're just all we're trying to just get along, not realizing how much the others are giving just to survive in a minimizing environment.
From there, we move into the first area that is considered more of the intercultural mindset, where I'm starting to be able to see things from another's perspective. And so that next level we call acceptance. And in acceptance, that's where I'm really becoming very aware of the differences, and I value them. I see the differences as an important part of relationship. When I work with someone, bringing in some of those differences I know will help us. They will broaden our perspectives. They help me to see things from another point of view besides my own. And so in that place of acceptance, I'm really understanding where these folks are coming from, and I'm trying to make sure that I'm doing things that welcome that, and that I'm in a place of really valuing the differences. I'm not quite to a place where maybe I'm completely comfortable yet, though, so that's the next level up.
So yeah, where acceptance is really a learning phase, where I'm open to learning about difference. Adaptation is a place where I've learned quite a bit, and I'm able to employ that in my interactions. So I'm able to have confidence in interacting with folks who may be very different from me, because I have spent some time listening and learning. It's not a matter of me changing who I am. I still am who I am, but I'm able to respectfully engage with others who may be very different from me. And when differences come up, it's not that I hold those back and hide them. I'm able to share my perspective that may be different, but in a respectful way, in a way that opens up our mutual understanding rather than pushing us both into polarization. So these practical tools and this way of talking about how we navigate difference is just really, I think, fundamental to everything we do in the rest of the pathway in all of the learning. And we're inviting educators to make connections between the IDI, what they're learning about culturally responsive practices, what they're learning about trauma, what they're learning about themselves and their students. And the one other thing I'll mention about this IDI, because it is such a tried and tested tool for measurement, we're able to give this assessment at the beginning and at the very end. And that gives us a real stronger sense of some of the progress that's been made. And we're going to share some of that data with you in just a little bit.
Something I'll share too about all of this work is that idea of starting from the individual and moving outward. And so that IDI piece is really important to the reflection and doing some of the inner work that needs to be done to be in a good place to, provide that learning environment we talked about. And so one of the pieces that we also have all of the participants be a part of is a small group course. And so this course is called Being Culturally Responsive. And it's a video course. They watch a series of videos where they have a chance to learn about 4 different key aspects of being culturally responsive. And as you can see here, they are things like the importance of listening and relational versus transactional accountability, being culturally responsive with our practices, and things like who's in my circle of trust. So in the course then, they have an opportunity in a small group to watch the videos together, share a little bit, do some self-reflection and journaling, and then come together and discuss it. Mm-hmm. So it's learning from what I'm watching and experiencing, learning from my own reflection and journaling, and then trying out some of my ideas in that nice smaller space, your own circle of trust right there. And that gives us a chance to sort of have those conversations in a smaller space before we're back with the entire group, which can be a little more intimidating, I think, sometimes for folks to speak up.
So you probably remember hearing a number of the participants talk about the book, My Grandmother's Hands, and that was, again, one of the more powerful pieces of this. Everyone was reading and doing a lot of journaling, and then during our seminars, we would come together to talk about that. And really, the book, we were concerned because it does deal with trauma, but the author is African American and not indigenous. And so we had questioned at the beginning of this, is that a good choice? As it turned out, it was a very good choice. And a lot of what we heard from a lot of our participants is they know a lot about specific trauma to indigenous people, especially in our region. But being able to kind of triangulate, hear about the specific traumas dealing with African Americans, dealing with white Americans, and the trauma associated with their experience, and with what the author calls blue body trauma, which is the specific trauma that is dealt with those in law enforcement or doing military service. And being able to look at those traumas and then bring that to bear on with the trauma that they've experienced individually and that they know about from their community was a really huge learning piece for all of them. The other thing about this particular book is, and I mentioned this before, it gives a lot of practical ways of metabolizing the trauma that we have, and an understanding that if we don't work to deal with and metabolize that trauma that we all have, then what we tend to do is to pass it on, is to create more trauma for others around us, whether they're our colleagues, our students, our families. And so that was a really powerful piece.
Also, I would say this is another one of those things that is a reflective piece, and it's something that I work on for myself. I might take a look at what are some of the traumas that, I have experienced in my life. It also helps me to apply it in my classroom, knowing that every student that I'm working with, every family that I'm working with, also has their levels of trauma and experiences that impact their learning.
Right. The other pieces that are really important, I think, to the specific communities that we're doing this with are, and we're fortunate here in North Dakota and in South Dakota to have Indigenous essential understandings. And so a piece of this is them deepening their understanding of that and then being able to implement that in their classroom. Developing skills for building lessons and units that take into consideration these things about culturally responsive practice, as well as the cultural pieces that they're trying to bring in. And then, of course, getting the modeling and possibly expanding into with their colleagues into their schools or school districts, which happened in the wake of that first cohort. You know, the principal, one of the principals who was there said, this needs to happen in my entire school. And so that's a big piece of the hope that we have for that. Both states that we've been working with have essential understandings. You can see there on the screen. These are the South Dakota essential understandings. These are the North Dakota essential understandings. And those are kind of, as we said before, the what, the cultural pieces. This pathway really helps them to say, okay, I have these cultural pieces. How do I bring them in a good way for all of my students?
One of the things that they have an opportunity to try as well is to explore some of the lessons that have been developed. On the Teachings of Our Elders website are, I don't know how many we have now, well over 100 lessons that have been developed by North Dakota teachers. And so they have an opportunity to take a look at those. There are also lessons on the Wolakota Project website that can be used, and they can begin to try to use those within their classrooms, remembering that they align both to the essential understandings and to the state content standards.
And of course, the other piece is bringing elder voices into the classroom, whether it's by the all of the video interviews that we have on both websites, or, you know, of course, in Turtle Mountain, they have lots of elders present, bringing in people to work with the students, to talk with the students, to share with the students, to guide the students is a big piece of this. Because culture responsive practice is really about recognizing that the community is the source of so much of what needs to happen, needs to be in the classroom.
And so depending on your community, you might choose different elders, you might choose different folks to focus on that are specific to your community. But the other thing that we did find out with this work is we were able to do a little bit of data collection around, especially around thoughts about, you know, how this has impacted my own practice, where I'm at, you know, in my IDI as I took it at the beginning and now at the end. And so we were able to put together some results of that, and they were quite compelling. The pre-pathway and post-pathway content of the data collected there from the assessment was really incredible. The movement from being primarily in minimization and polarization at the beginning to having folks that moved all the way up into adaptation was pretty exciting. And hearing from the individuals about that was exciting too. They talked about how they felt the change. They experienced, they see now ways that they maybe act in different ways than they did in the past, because they've learned that maybe some of the things that they were saying and doing just were creating defensive walls around them.
And I think also the way that impacts them both professionally and personally was a huge piece. You know, when you realize that I'm taking difference in these ways, I'm reacting, I'm responding in these ways, and you make some decisions to change that, that's not only going to impact your interaction with your students, it has a strong way of impacting the way you interact with your family members, with your spouse, with your others in your community. And so it's a huge, huge benefit that doesn't only impact our schools, it also impacts our whole community.
So just in closing here, one of the things that we'd like to say is, there's nothing necessarily magical about this combination of learning opportunities, but what we have found is these are the best of the best things that we have learned over the last 10 years or so. And we find that when educators are given an opportunity to work with them, to work through these different experiences, it is transformative, and it gives them that steeped time to really spend focused on their practice and how they can improve themselves both personally and professionally. And so we hope that it's something that you might find value in, and we'd be glad to talk about it. We have modified it for other places. We've done parts of it in other places. We do find the best experience, though, is to do the entire pathway together if you have the ability to do that.
Yeah, it's really something that from a holistic standpoint, you can take every little bit and piece of this and put it into a half day or 1 day set of trainings. But I think the real benefit is having a group go through it, experience this pathway in this way for an extended amount of time. It really changes the narrative that we're reacting to. It can help transform the way I see myself as an educator, as a teacher, and my role in my school and in my community. So,
if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us or to Lucy, and we'd be glad to talk about opportunities and options that you would have in your own districts.
Thanks for your time. Bye.